do Q&A, we'll get some common themes, and I'll do my best to try to hit themes that are surfacing in the questions. It may be that your question works better with tomorrow's content. So as Brian said, Brian left us on a lot of cliffhangers, and you'll have to come back. But we will try to touch some themes that are relevant for tonight and all of that. And so we have two panelists up here I want to introduce who are joining us. We're very thankful to have Annie Mays and Marcus Walker. Yes, clap for them. Annie Mays is, I'm going to get your title wrong, Assistant Regional Director for Young Life of South Texas. Oh, are you on? Okay. Here.
There we go. Assistant to the regional manager is fine.
Good. With Young Life in South Texas. Annie has worked with Young Life for 20 years and is a longtime member of Redeemer. She has worked hard to bring the ministry of Young Life to schools where the usual funding for a ministry like that might not work well because there's not a community that can support a ministry based on parent donations and things like that. So we want to talk with her about the realities of what she sees in her work. And then Marcus Walker joins us from Daily Bread Ministries. Marcus is the executive director there, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his work. Marcus, we're also very excited to say this is also along the announcements line. On page 10 of your program, we're excited to be announcing a training that Marcus is going to lead for us in April here at Redeemer. We are doing a lot of big picture work this weekend, and so if you feel moved and you want to dig into specifics, get more equipped, join us in our ministries, go back to the ministries that you're part of, and engage. We want to provide you a good next step. Marcus is a trained ambassador of the Chalmers Center, Brian's organization. Yay! And so he's going to lead us in that. Marcus, tell us a little bit about what Daily Bread does and about what we're going to do in this training, real quick.
Okay. Am I working?
Yep.
Okay, good. Yeah, we work with a network of churches here in San Antonio, primarily San Antonio. Most people think we're a food ministry because it's Daily Bread. And we do use food, but we use food as a tool to build relationships with the community. We support this network of 100 churches or so. We provide them with the food to go out and do the food pantries that they run. But through those food pantries, they've been trained through When Helping Hurts, which you've heard more about and what we're going to do training on. They learn how to use the food as a tool to build relationships with people. And as they build those relationships, then we can begin to speak into some of these, a new story of change. So as opposed to just the continual handout and consumption and salvation, we try to go a little bit deeper than that. And so in the When Helping Hurts training, there's just some amazing things that I've learned, that we've learned in that process. And so we're going to try to bring that 6-week study that we do with all of the churches that we work with here to you and knock it out in about 6 hours, I think. So
efficiency.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting, but a lot of fun, and I hope that you'd be interested in that. So
great, thank you so much. Okay, so we've obviously covered a lot of ground tonight, but we'll start off with a question for Victor. Victor, you lead our efforts here at Redeemer in this area, and as we've learned, there's a lot to regret about where we have been and can be in these ministries and as we seek to be faithful. But do we have to become experts, or can we be faithful and wise? How do we move and grow in these things?
Well, here we go. Right. I'm actually louder without a mic. Yeah. That's a good question, and I think that we actually think more about that we might even be aware of, because like we said, it's a complicated subject. It's not one you just fix. It's not one that you're going to start seeing fruit or results immediately. Sometimes it takes years, and so I think the real no experts allowed. We are not experts. I would be wary of anybody that thinks we're an expert or that they are an expert on this. And in fact, I I think part of it is we have to really truly examine our hearts, what's behind. It's good that we have that desire. I hope we all have it. But then it's good to really pause, stop, and say, why am I really being drawn to this? Why do I want to be part of this? And I think sometimes if we're honest, and I mean, I know because I've had to be honest with me, and when not, Jeannie really becomes honest with me and helps me. But it's that really, what is my heart? What is my motivation? And is it that I want to maybe secretly, I'm not saying it out loud, but deep inside of me is a desire that it's going to be good, or it's going to make me better, or it's going to put me in a place where, spiritual people should aspire to be and to participate. And I think that is important because that is going to help us to not wear out or to not run out of gas so soon, but to actually stick with it and think of ourselves as not only people that are going to come help, but people are really going to have to come to learn in knowing people. And that's kind of messy. That takes time. It takes relationships. It has to be in person. It can't be from distance, as we are saying. But I think the more we go after that, whether we meant to or not, our hearts, I really believe, will start falling in the right place. Especially when we realize that we are not just giving, we are ourselves as well receiving. And so, yeah, no experts. I think we got to check our hearts, and I think we have to be ready for a long haul and not get so discouraged so soon, even as we make mistakes. This is the essence of ministry. And we see the struggles of the disciples. We see the struggles that they were allowed even as they learned. And I think that gives me hope for all of us.
Thank you. So we've talked tonight about, you've said that there's a need to know the people you want to minister to. There's no ministry outside of relationship is going to be a big theme that we'll talk about, and outside of community. We've also talked about kind of false stories we can have. Marcus and Annie, you work here on the ground in San Antonio a lot. And so I think one thing that would be helpful for us would be for you to talk about what you witness in your ministries, about who the poor are in our city. Marcus, if you'll start, since you run a ministry that equips churches to do this, what have you learned about the poor in San Antonio? Because while we want to move and have relationship, it also helps us to have correct stories about them. So, what do you see in your work?
I think it's different than what most people think right off the bat, and I think if we could just stop there for a minute and just even talking to ourselves and say this is probably different than what I think or what I see with my worldly eyes. We try to talk about what does it look like to pray before going out, so that we can maybe God, will you remove the scales from my eyes so that I can see things the way you see things? Because we need that before we can actually do something. And so when we're doing that, what we're finding and what people would tell you is people crave relationships. They need other people. They need somebody to sit down and actually listen to them and to engage with them and to care about the things that they care about. When we do that, it changes something. Something shifts there, and so that's really what we're seeing. And if you want to know just kind of how the world is, over the last several years, where we've seen this thing, what was it called? Where we had to keep 6 feet apart, and social distancing, right? It just increased the problem more. People are more isolated than they've ever been, and that's what we see. But we need each other. We were designed to be in relationship, and that's we've got to pay attention to that.
Yeah. Annie, tell us about what you see as you have been in schools and in San Antonio a long time.
Yeah, getting to know kids and continuing to be closely in relationship with them. Sometimes I make the joke that because of Young Life, I never had to grow up. I started I was a Young Life kid. I had adults who came into my life during this really crucial time, which was high school, and I was not materially poor, but I did not know Jesus and was just falling apart and lonely and really on the verge of some really destructive choices and paths to go down. But as I met Jesus, kind of got to jump into volunteering, and it was a week before my 19th birthday when someone said, "You're a leader now. You will bring others to Jesus," and have not missed a day of that ever since. And so I never really had to grow up in the best way. But having grown up and hanging out with kids, I see that, people say the same things about teenagers that they say about poor people. If they would just make better decisions, if they would just act like adults, it wouldn't be so hard for them to be an adolescent. If we could just get them to do what we told them to do, or if we could just get them to think better about their decision, man, they would be so much happier and successful and less of a nuisance to society. And we forget what that feels like. Not everyone has been poor, but I can tell everyone's been a teenager or will be, Lord willing, if you haven't yet. And so being in relationship, being known, spending enough time with someone in a very inefficient relationship that it cannot be quantified or run through an efficiency model, right? Being there in the midst of a bunch of bad decisions or incomplete social development, and being Jesus and showing people how much they matter. I mean, it's just, we learn from them too, but it is a reminder that change is often slow, but even when these big sort of milestone moments happen, it's the people who have put in the time and effort and sort of painstakingly inefficient relationship with you who get to have the most impact and really get to shepherd you through the breakthroughs as well. So,
Marcus, you and I have talked, and you've told me that in your ministry, a lot of the churches that you equip, they are serving with food distribution ministries. They're serving families. They're serving people who are working. Can you talk about that a little bit, what that looks like here in San Antonio?
Yeah. Well, first, just to the efficiency thing, because you're so right. Part of the narrative of the American dream is efficiency, and relationships aren't efficient. And so, yeah, yes.
have you ever filled out a grant application where you have to put numbers on what you're doing?
We're going to be here all night if we start talking about that. So let's not. Yeah. I'm sorry, tell me your question again. I distracted myself.
It was just, tell us a little bit about who you find yourself serving in a space of food insecurity in San Antonio.
Yeah, it's really interesting because one of the things that we most often come across is people think that we feed the homeless. Mm-hmm. And yeah, okay, homeless people are hungry too, but the primary people that we're serving are people that actually have homes. They're just in a situation where I've got to decide, do I feed my kids or do I pay my light bill? And so, those are more the people that our churches are seeing and the churches that we're working with. They're people that are in homes and they have a place to live, but they just they're not making ends meet. And inflation and the things that have come over the last several years have just kind of made that situation a little bit worse. And so, so yeah, that's really the truth of it is that it's not, when you think about helping people, it's not just the homeless. I would tell you that homeless ministry is a completely different animal, is what I would say, than what we do. It's a totally different thing in and of itself that's very important as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I know that working with kids over the years, you've seen also that sometimes when people are, to tag off of homelessness, you're talking about that, when people are homeless, that's not always the label that's put on it, right? You said you see kids and they say, we moved, or we're staying with someone.
Yeah, in our city, there's a huge population, as Marcus talks about, who you're not going to see under the overpass after church or on your way home from work, but they are in this incredibly fragile place where maybe they are just over the federal poverty line, which means they have now fallen off the benefits cliff. They no longer qualify for some of the government aid that you would assume is helping people in that right category, right? So they are working. They do still have pretty interconnected social relationships, especially in San Antonio. We have a much higher Hispanic population. Those are much more interconnected, multi-generational systems, but where there is vulnerability, you may not see it right away on the outside. And again, yeah, I pay really close attention when any teenager tells me that they moved. Miss, I moved, I have a new address, pick me up over here. That could mean that someone didn't make rent. It could be that mom's boyfriend is now violent. It could be any number of things where, like when my friend moved in high school, it was like, cool, your parents got a bigger house. Now you have a pool. But again, in a lot of our populations in San Antonio, even something like that, when a family member passes away, again, where you come from determines whether you get richer or poorer when someone in your family dies. And so for a lot of our kids, even the death or sickness of a family member tips that economic breaking point where suddenly people who never had to make those decisions are suddenly showing up in a food line. And then we have our assumptions. That's when like our brain kicks on of the story we tell about who they are.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Brian, baked into the thing that you're telling us about our assumptions about the American dream, there can also be the flip of it, which is the idea that money is going to fix all of this. We're going to spend money in the right way, and it's going to fix everything. What do we do to the poor when we say that? And then what do we do to the non-materially poor who don't just have a ton of money? Like, can no one help if you can't fix the situation with infinite money? Can you not help? Yeah.
Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, now what?
We're gonna get into this a little bit more tomorrow, but you know what we've heard tonight over and over and over and over again is that it's about relationship, and it's not just because some social scientist has figured out a cool technique or something. It's because that's actually how the human being is wired. Mm-hmm. And it's because of the way that God himself is wired. And there's really no other option. That's just the wiring of the universe is relational. And all of us can offer that. You don't need money. Mm-hmm. You don't need money to offer a healthy relationship. You just need love. Mm-hmm.
That's good. Okay, so because you are our expert also, you get to be the expert. I'm going to ask you a question that's come up a lot and that I figured would. When you get asked about homelessness, and specifically about this moment we all encounter when we're asked for money on the street, what do you say?
Yeah, so that's actually the hardest situation, I think. In God's grace, I've gotten to work to address issues of poverty all over the world. There's nothing harder than homelessness in America to address. Nothing. And I think we all sense this, that there's something going on there that isn't just a lack of stuff, and it is a loss of relationship. Oftentimes, there's something that's gone wrong in a marriage that has resulted in this, or the person may have been rejected by somebody and has gone this direction, but it's a relational problem, and you can't solve relational problems with money. It doesn't work. So what do? You're walking down the street and a person's asking you for money. I rarely give money in those situations because I think I'm actually just enabling the person to continue in that situation. So I almost never give money. Once in a while, I always try to pray for wisdom, and once in a while I kind of feel like, okay, maybe this is different, maybe this person needs help. So sometimes I'll do that. I've often made mistakes doing that. Experts in homelessness have told me that for a homeless ministry, it takes 70 to 80 touches with a homeless person. By touch, I mean conversation and so on, before that person be even open to real help from you. And so it's just a long, long process. And given that it's a long, long process, I generally don't hand out money. There are exceptions when it's very, very cold and I feel like the person's life is in danger. I know that I'm enabling the person to persist, but if I don't, they could die. And so in those kinds of situations, I do give assistance. But generally what I'm trying to do is refer people to agencies that can walk with them over time in deeply relational ways. Yeah. But it's so hard. Because what I fall into then is walking past and not making eye contact because it's uncomfortable. And that's not the right thing either. So it's the worst. Mm-hmm. It's the worst.
Victor, we have a lot of organizations in our city, though, that work really well and strongly with our homeless population. And so this gets into a question that I just have for you sort of philosophically is, does every church need to have a ministry for every problem that there is in-house, where we just invent, we have our own thing, and we have to become the expert? Do we have to do that at an institutional level?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I think praise the Lord that we do not have to have a clothes closet or a food closet or a shelter. I mean, when I met Jim Gibson, I don't know, 14, 15 years ago, he's as tall as you are. And he one of the things he told me as we were talking about partnership, he said, we want to be Redeemer's shelter. Mm-hmm. Redeemer has a shelter here with us. And so our partnership wasn't just to send volunteers, and same with also CAMP, Christian Assistant Ministries. They're actually more than just receiving our volunteers. Our partnership with them allows us to serve those needs that they have, that we don't have to invent the wheel again, but that we work with these agencies. And so literally we are sharing the poor that we meet or the homeless that we meet with them, and sometimes they come back. And so that's, I think, a brilliant way of doing in terms of ministry partners, city partners. I would say, though, that I think that Redeemer has done a lot of that, and we could say it's mostly voluntarism, where people are able to give time. For our deacons and elders, it also becomes a real ministry as we're helping people walk through that. So that goes beyond that. But I do think that Redeemer does have to pray about what is something that we could do, that is not being meant, that we could pray about and embrace, and maybe do something by Redeemer that becomes significant. And because I think if we are able to go there and do that, we would be moving from voluntarism, which is great, to also then members that for many reasons cannot just volunteer, would help us to be part of that or to embrace that or to make it happen, because you would be needing more than volunteers. You would be needing people that are binding to the ministry, that have expertise that we don't have. So I think as we are praying, mm-hmm. and we're moving in that direction. But I think that in itself is also very, very important.
Yeah. Okay, so we will run out of time shortly. And Brian, I know you've said you're not going to tell us all the answers, the 3 easy answers, until tomorrow, right? But can you give us a little preview of where we're headed tomorrow?
Yeah. So tomorrow, the first session, we'll talk about God's story. So tonight we talked about 2 false stories. Tomorrow we'll talk about the right story. And folks, we have the best story ever. And we just have to tell it. And it's the right story for materially poor people. It's the right story for you and for me. And it's the greatest story. And I'll start. It's just the greatest story. And the church in America right now is under siege, and we're divided, and we're doing stupid things. We've just got to get back to the right story. It's the best story ever. And it's not a Republican story. It's not a Democrat story. It's just it's a kingdom story. It's a different story. And so the first part of tomorrow will just be getting back in touch with the right story. And I need to be reminded of what it is, of really what does human flourishing really look like? And how do we get there in God's story? And that's the first session. The second session will then be some practical tips for how do we start to live into that story amongst people who are poor. So I told you we're going to go from the very abstract down to the practical. The last session will start to get into just what does that look like? What can you do? And I just want to echo what's been said here tonight. You don't have to be an expert. What you have to offer is you. That's the thing. Because you happen to be filled with the Holy Spirit. and the same power that raised Christ from the dead is at work in you. That's pretty good. So what you have to offer is that. That's the thing. And so we'll talk about that tomorrow.
Good. We hope you will come back. A few quick reminders for Saturday. Do not park in the credit union parking lot tomorrow. All the other lots are fine. We will start with coffee and pastries at 8:30. So come have that. And then I believe